Welcome to the Robatdesk podcast, Pastor Drew Tarwater. How you doing today?
Rob, I'm great, man. Good to be with you today.
Well, thanks for joining me. We have something in common, and I wanted to bring that up here before we get going.
Yeah, bring it up.
We both have a luscious head of hair, and I'm just trying to compete with your head of hair. So, I mean, my headphones are kind of knocking it down a little bit, but I just, there's certain people who are like, dang, good hair. Like, especially once you start getting like to my age, I'm a few years ahead of you. It's like, once you get past 40, you're like, you see someone your age and you go, they got a good head of hair.
You know, my hair was so good, I decided to buzz it all off. You know, I just thought that would be the way to go.
You're just trying to get a better time. See, you're also more competitive, like for your marathon training. You're like, I'm going low drag configuration.
It's true. It's true. It's all about aerodynamics when it comes to winning. So that's what I'm all about.
Right. Yeah. So I was like, oh, yeah, that's about all we. I was like, good set of hair. I saw a picture a while back. Your wife showed us, and yeah.
It used to be a real good head of hair, but 3 kids, 2 dogs in church, man, went fast.
It goes. No, I don't have a camera in the back here to show the spot here, but no.
Yeah, that's where it starts, man. There's always a good, it's got to have a starting point.
Yeah, everything's got a starting point. So, Pastor Drew, talking of starting points, you've been going through with your congregation the book of Genesis.
Yeah, we started the new year off. We decided we were going to do a small effort. We were going to go from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22 in a year. Not trying to do anything too crazy. Jeez. And quickly, it went from a year to 15 months.
Okay.
And the problem is that the more I dig into Genesis, that it's just so good that I'm going to end up extending the series longer and longer. So pray for me, because who knows when we're going to finish this.
Right. No doubt. So 15 months to get through the Bible.
Yeah, it's going to be good. If we can do it right, here's my plan, is that we kicked it off 2022, book of Genesis, and we're breaking it into mini series, right? So season 1, season 2. And so season 1 is Genesis, and we're calling it Beginnings. And we're just looking at how God unfolds what we're calling the greater story. And by Christmas of this year, we'll be at the empty tomb. And then by Easter of next year, we'll be at Jesus coming back. And so it's going to be beautiful how it all comes together. But I got to make sure I don't get too far in the weeds, because I got to stay on pace.
Right. Yeah. No, there's a timeline you got to stick with, I guess.
There definitely is.
So Genesis is always a book that's interested me. Like my wife just finished reading it, and as she's reading it, she's like, there is some crazy stuff in here.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah,
family feuds, wars, battles, lies, deception. I mean, it's like everybody's daytime soap opera fix, all found in the first book of the Bible.
I think I've seen this on HBO Max. So, there's some big questions, because when people talk about the Bible in general as a whole, they go, is it a scientific document, especially while you're talking about the creation of the earth and the universe? What's that look like? New earth, old earth, things like that. And I guess we should give a little bit of background. You're the pastor of a church here in Denver area, so you at least are the expert here between the two of us.
We'll see. We'll see when we get into this.
It's a fascinating subject when you start thinking about,
it is.
How do we all get here?
It is. And as Christians, we want the Bible to answer all of our big questions, right?
Yeah.
And as people, we naturally have these massive questions about life. Everybody has the questions. How do we get here? Who made us? Why are we here? When did it happen? And you and I, we have a unique perspective, because we are looking at the world from a 2022 viewpoint. And so we have all these questions. We have all these, we're looking back through all of what science has been saying in textbooks as we grew up, and what we hear in the news. And we're trying to then filter that through what God's word says. And so we can try to make sense of it. And as you hinted on a few minutes ago, there's so many theories out there about creation. Is it a new earth? Is it young earth? Is it old earth? Did God use evolution? Is theistic evolution even a thing? Did God spit it out in, is it really 7 days? Or are the 7 days figurative that encompass like this Dage A theory? And there's so many theories out there. It's crazy.
Let's start with that one. The 7-day theory creation. How many days was creation? What's your thought process on that?
Yeah, it's really fun. I mean, really it's 6 days, and then on day 7, God cracks an iced tea and sits back and looks over his creation and just takes a big deep breath and rests. And there has been a ton of debate over this over the centuries, right? Is God saying in Genesis 1 that the world was created in 7 days? Mm-hmm. Or is God communicating something else? And so we actually at Forefront Church, we crawled through Genesis chapter 1, and we spent 4 weeks working through the creation story, right? Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 2:3 is the 7 days.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things are, if you ask anybody that sat in on, and was with us those first 4 weeks of the series, I never answered it directly whether it's 7 days or not. So I left a little teaser out there for you to have to determine on your own.
So when you go to bed at night, what's your thought on it? Like, what do you like? I mean, and here's the thing is, like, Christians, as we believe God created, and then there's some interpretive license, I guess. Like,
right.
This way I've heard it described, you have open-handed and closed-handed beliefs. Like, there's closed-handed, like, if you want to call it, like, the Nicene Creed is like kind of like the best example of closed-handed, where it's like, we believe that, Jesus, lived, Son of God, died, rose again, perfect life, right, for us, for our sins. Like, that's non-debatable.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's that great quote by Augustine. He says, in essentials, we have to have unity. In non-essentials, we can have liberty. In all things, charity. And so I think an essential is, who created all of this? Well, God did.
Yeah.
And I think God clearly communicates that to us in Genesis 1. Maybe a non-essential in my book would be, well, how did he do it and how many days did it take? Right.
Right.
And so, Rob, you can say, hey, did God create the world in 7 days? Could he have? Oh, for sure. Could God have created the world in 7 seconds? For sure. Right. And so there's liberty, because I could say, hey, Rob, I'm very firm on it. God says 7 days. I'm taking him at his word. And you could say, hey, but when we see the word day in Scripture, we see God say things like, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, right? Well, does that mean that God only owns cattle on 1,000 hills? Well, no, it means that God owns all the cattle, right? And a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. Well, what's God saying? Well, he's saying that he controls time, right? Time is God's. And so I think it's fun to debate, but it's not an essential issue. And one of the things I really had fun with in these first 4 weeks in Genesis 1 is we said, what is God trying to tell us? And so we said, we need to understand context, right? Because context is key. And so we come to Genesis 1, and you and I, we bring our 21st century questions. We're like, God, how did you do it? God, when did you do it? And God, where did you do it? And God is saying, hold on a second. I need you to come asking the right questions. And the way we determine the right questions is because of context, right?
Right.
Because remember who God's writing to. He's writing to a group of people who are in the ancient Near East, who had just been rescued out of Egypt and now are following this God that they saw brought all of these plagues. If you're familiar with the book of Exodus, right? 10 plagues come. God rescues this people from slavery in Egypt. He then parts the sea. And now they're in the wilderness, and they're seeing God is leading them through the wilderness by a cloud, a pillar of fire and a cloud. And they're going, who is this guy? And God says, let me teach you something about me. But to do it, he uses things in context that we would understand. So for you and me, if God was talking to us today, he would speak to us in terminology that we're going to get, right? And he'd use word pictures that we understand. What's interesting, he did the exact same thing to these ancient Near East readers 3,500 years ago. But if we can learn to put our glasses on and read it the way God intended us to read it, we can glean so much from just one chapter of the Bible.
No, absolutely. Well, what's one of the big things you pulled out of that in context?
Yeah, one of the really fun things that I kept telling the people at Forefront was, let's not ask how, but who. So God, we want to know how, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
God, was it the Big Bang? God, did you use where did black holes come in? God, how did you do it? So was it really 7 days or was it all at once? And we want to know those kind of things. God is instead saying who, right? If you notice Genesis 1:1, God just says, in the beginning, God, right? In the beginning. When's the beginning? He doesn't tell us. He just says in the beginning, right? And the Hebrew for that actually means at first. So at first, God created the heavens and the earth. And so right then, he's not saying how, he's saying who. Another thing we see is not when, but why. And so one of the things I really loved is there's this pattern in creation, okay? And so you see day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, right? When you look at that, there's a pattern, and you see what God does is he creates, and then he fills it with life and gives it purpose. And this is so cool. So go back and read Genesis 1. You're going to see on day 1, God says, let there be light, and there's light. But it's not till day 4 that you see the sun and stars and moon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what God is doing in day 1 is he's creating light, but in day 4, he's giving light purpose. He's saying, I'm putting stars in the sky to help you determine seasons. I'm putting a light in the sun during the day and the moon at night to help you govern time and give you light to see. The same thing happens on day 2 and day 5. You see on day 2, he creates the heavens, the sky, and the seas. And then on day 5, he fills it with birds and fish. And so God is telling us that the who is, I'm the creator. The why is because I give purpose to life. And so when you start to look at creation as a pattern, you realize that God is revealing things about himself, about his character and his nature that are so transcendent. It's hard to wrap your mind around, but God's telling it to us in a way where we can understand it.
No, that's a good point. So is it a new earth or old earth?
It's a great question. Let me tell you something really fun. So as I was looking and doing some study in this series in the book of Genesis, I wanted to go back and read what is God telling these Hebrews, right? These Israelites that grew up for 400 years, generation after generation in Egypt, and now he's trying to communicate to them who he is, right? Because again, they're going, what is going on? Who is this guy? And he's our God. And then if he's our God, though, how come our cattle are still dying? How come growing crops is still hard? If our God can part the Red Sea and bring locusts and turn the Nile to blood, then how come I'm still getting sick, right? Or how come I lost my hair, and all of these things. And so I think God is communicating the who and the why. And so this is really cool. Notice this. So imagine you're an ancient Near East reader, right? And you grew up in Egypt, and you hear all these stories about the Egyptian creation myth. And the Egyptian creation myth tells you a story like this: that at the beginning of time, there were dark waters, and they were endless dark waters. And out of those dark waters came a god named Atum. And this god spoke himself into existence. And this God then had twins, and these twins became known as basically sky and water, right? And I believe if I can remember right, the names were Nut and Tefnut, and then great names.
Right.
And then they had twins, and those twins were Geb, who was the earth, right? And then there is another twin who I believe was Tefnut. I think I got that wrong, who is now the sky. And then that ground became the place where Atum, who then became Ra, you've probably heard of Ra, the sun god in Egypt, who was their creator god. Ra would then rest on the ground. And then you have this story of creation that was born out of these dark, endless waters. Okay, so this is like the creation myth that the Hebrews would have grown up hearing from Egypt. Now, notice what God does. God comes in on day 1 and says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then he says, verse 2, the earth was formless and void and empty, and the Spirit of God hovered over the dark waters. So what God is saying is, hey, I know you grew up hearing about this God named Atum who spoke himself out of the water and became this phoenix-like bird dude named Ra, and who had twins, and they became the sky. And he said, actually, no, I am the God who created heavens and earth. And when I created everything, before there were no dark waters, it was nothing. I created it all. And then it was my spirit, not Atum, some bird god dude. It's my spirit that hovered over the waters. And what God is saying is that I created it all, and I'm the one that brings order to the chaos. And then he says, let there be light. So it's in direct conflict with the Egyptian creation myth. He's telling the people of Israel, hey, what you heard was actually, it was a false advertising. It wasn't real. Because let me set the record straight. I created all of this, and then I'm the one who said, let there be light. I spoke light into existence, not some sun god named Ra. He's not real. I'm the one who created it all. So, like, when we can see it in context of the Egyptian creation myth, it all comes into light, and we go, wow, God is using something that they would have understood 3,500 years ago to create this amazing transcendent truth for them to understand.
No, that's interesting to think about when, like, what was the standard knowledge of the day for them listening to this for the first time? What did they think when they heard it?
Exactly. It's true. If you think about it, the the Israelites were constantly messing up, right? I mean, they go to the wilderness, if you know the story, and Moses goes up onto Mount Sinai, and God's given him the 10 Commandments. And before he can get back, they're asking Aaron, Moses' brother, to build them a calf that they can worship. They're so used to looking at these little idols, they're worshiping false idols, because that's what they knew in Egypt, right? Mm-hmm. And so God over and over again is always saying, I am the Lord your God. I am one. Even in Deuteronomy chapter 6, he says, in what's called the Shema, he says, don't forget, the Lord your God is one. And he's directly saying, hey, this pantheistic world that you grew up in Egypt with all these little gods that govern this little bitty area or had this one responsibility, those are not real. There's only one God, and it's me. And guess what? I am the one that rescued you out of Egypt. So get to know me. And so God is just continually trying to pound that into their heads that there is only one God, and if they follow him, he's going to lead them to a life of flourishing. But they've got to learn to put their past behind them.
No, it's interesting. Can I run an idea by you or a theory?
Run it.
On why people think, because I guess scientists today, they say the Earth is around 13.7 and change billion years old. They've kind of narrowed down when they think the Big Bang happened, which I think is kind of cool, where it's kind of, they said, hey, this is because like evolutionists for time would just say every time there was an issue, like, well, time was their answer. Now all of a sudden it's 13.7 billion years.
Right.
No, they don't have infinite time. They have 13.7 billion. So
right.
All of a sudden things become a little bit more like, oh, we got to,
got to fit it all in this window.
Yeah. And then if you look at hardcore young earthers, they're saying the Earth is anywhere from 6,500 to maybe 10,000 years old is the range when they do their, what's the tables and, family trees all the way back to Adam. So you go, there's a big gap there. It's from 10,000 years to 13.7 billion.
Right.
I mean, like if I said, hey, $10,000 or 13 billion, you're like, hey, that's the big gap there. What's
big gap?
Big gap. So I think there's 3 events in history that kind of like where you go, okay, it could be a younger Earth. And once again, I'm open to both to an extent. If God created, I don't believe in evolution in the sense that we created ourselves, because that goes anti to what God said.
Right.
So, but the thought is going, okay, there's 3 major events that changed how we look at things and how we can see things. And I think the first one that people would think of in Christianity would be the flood.
Right. The flood.
So the globe's covered completely by water. It changes a lot. So when things are dated and things, who knows how that changes a big global catastrophic event. It's pretty interesting to watch, like, is Genesis History, that documentary, and things with
Oh yeah, right.
with Del Tackett and things like that. You go, okay, there's that event, and then you go, was when God formed the earth, like, we're assuming Adam and Eve, when he created them, they weren't infants, so they were created with some age,
Right.
so it's like, and trees and things were formed, so things weren't, seedlings. They were formed at with some age, whatever that age is. It's an unknown. So you go, like, how many rings were on a tree if Adam cut one down on day 2?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So who knows? Like, I don't know. Did Adam have a belly button? I don't know. So things like that. So you just don't know. And then I think the third one, which I think is really interesting, that could sort of change, like, a perspective. Like, I've heard it explained like a piece of glass, or like when you look at water, it's like it refracts what you can see. Is the fall of man, where God cursed everything.
Yeah.
And so you go, we were created possibly with age. It was cursed. And so there's some big variables in there. We just go, we don't. And then the flood, we go, we just don't know what things look like.
Right.
And so, and when you look back through history and what science can show us through history, if you're looking at it from an evolutionary worldview, you would never see those as anything more than another change or cycle or whatever. But as a Christian, you kind of go, that might be a point where there's a big gap in something, and you go, oh,
right. No, it's a good point. Like that theory between macroevolution and microevolution.
Yeah.
A bird can change its beak color, but you never see, but can a lizard become, a dog, like the transitionary species. And so it's a big debate. One of the fun things we were talking about as part of the series is, if you think about it, how does God speak to us? He speaks to us through his word, right?
Yep.
But also through nature. Like, we learn a lot by studying the way the world works. So God speaks to us through his word and through nature. Well, how do we study those things? So science is the study of nature. Theology is the study of God's word, right? Now, we have this perceived conflict that exists. The perceived conflict is that science and the Bible don't, they're fighting, right? Whether you're a Christian or you're a non-Christian, and you say, hey, science is truth, or you're a Christian who says, hey, the Bible is truth. What we find is you've got science at conflict with the Bible, but does it really make sense? If it's the Bible and nature, it's theology and science. Really, the perceived conflict shouldn't be between the Bible and science. It should be between between science and theology, right? Well, who are the people doing the studying? Well, it's people like us. All of us, because we live in a Genesis 3 world, are imperfect. So really, the conflict exists between imperfect people who have an imperfect knowledge, who are trying to study science and theology. See, God's word and God's nature, they would line up if we could understand them in perfect knowledge. So the perceived conflict is really, it's between us. It's between me, and it's between, figuratively speaking, you trying to make sense of this. And so we go to the Bible and we say, God, teach me what I need to know about creation and history and timelines. And God is saying, hey, I've given you the Bible and the word and the world. Let them illuminate each other. Right. And so I think when we do look at the Bible, and we do see that God, when he created everything, he didn't create it as little seedlings that grew. He created full sequoias and full redwoods. He created Adam and Eve full grown. They say that the most baseball players at its age 27 is the year they really break out. So I'm guessing Adam and Eve were 27. Right? He created them at age 27. And then so I think you can say, yeah, for sure, like, I don't think God has hit play and it took 13 billion years, right, for it to all come together. But what I don't know, and you asked me about my opinion, what I don't know is, did God allow more time to take place in these areas? He could have. He for sure could have. See, I don't know I think what God is saying in the 7-day picture of creation, he's showing us who and why he created it, I don't know that he's telling us exactly how many days it took. Because if you're an ancient Near East reader and God was like, hey, just so you know, I ended up, doing this over the course of 3,265 days, they would have no ground to understand that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But God gave them the 7 days of creation in a poem that they could understand and memorize and communicate in a verbal culture to their kids. And so again, did God create in 7 days? He for sure could have. Is God telling us that he created the world? And is he using the 7-day word picture to tell us it was 7 days? I'm not so sure. I think he's doing it more. I think one of the things he's doing is he's creating a pattern to show us that things are made complete. Because if you notice, the number 7 in the Bible is a number for completion. And so I think what God is saying, that he makes things complete, and God completed creation. And so he's telling us some transcendent truths in this word picture of 7 days. Unfortunately, we scientists and Christians, non-Christians and Christians, have gotten really hung up on that 7-day thing and missed some of the truth that God really wanted to tell us.
No, there's a point in there, yeah, where everybody wants to just fight over the, what's the correct literal or literarily?
Oh, right, yeah.
Or is
Exactly.
it a literal 7 days or literally? And
yeah. How do you read the Bible? Literally, or as literature, right? There's a good debate there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So speaking of that, then we'll move on past the creation, and there are some other crazy stories in Genesis. What's the next one in your mind that pops out? You're going, yeah, this one's going to be a fun one to explain to people.
Yeah. So in 2 weeks, we're going to hit Genesis 3, right? Where mankind sins for the first time. So one of the things we talked about this week, we said, if God is good and God makes everything good, like he says in Genesis 1, then why is the world such a mess? And one of the things I said was, we won't understand it all until we hit Genesis 2 and 3. But Genesis 2 gives us the picture of what God created the world to be like, right? And so imagine you walk into a room full of Legos and they're all on the floor, and you start building those Legos together. You have no idea what you're building, right? And you can create something, but you have no idea what it was originally meant to be. Well, Genesis 2 gives us the picture of the Lego box. It's the schematic of what the Millennium Falcon is supposed to look like if you build it right? And so God says, here's the perfect creation. In Genesis 2, we're going to see, God created man, he created us in relationship, he created us to work, all these things. He created the garden in Eden for us to live in. In Genesis 3, we're going to see how we mess it up because we listened to the same lie that gets us every time. And that lie is, did God really say? And from one decision that Adam and Eve make, it just spirals into a humanity that has born broken because of that. So, because immediately what you see is God creates this world, beautiful, chapter 2, this beautiful garden where trees are beautiful and they're full of ribs and delicious pulled pork and all these delicious things.
Yeah.
Do
you think they ate meat in the garden? Like when was it was it after the fall that we got meat, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I like to joke about that, but in the garden it says that God gave seed, or in creation story he tells us that God gave us seeds for plants for food, and he created trees that had fruit that was good to eat. And so we actually, I don't think we see barbecue enter the picture until after the flood.
So yeah, that's a interesting dilemma there where you go.
It is. Yeah, but you see things go off the rails quick, right?
Yeah.
Genesis 3, man sins. Genesis 4, first murder. Genesis 5, all kinds of weird things are happening, right? All kinds of people are having babies with each other. And then by Genesis 6, you see that mankind is completely sinful except for one dude named Noah. So, and here's what's fun. We have no clue how long it took us to get from Genesis 3 to Genesis 6. But I have heard some people say that there could have been upwards to 10 billion people on the earth by the time God decides to send the flood in Genesis chapter 6. So
they come up with the 10 billion number, do you think? Do you remember?
They do is they end up taking so the age, just think Noah, Seth, Methuselah, who's like 1,000 years old, right? And you end up saying, hey, if these people have children at such and such birth rate,
Yeah.
and then they have children at such and such birth rate, and they all lived 800 years long, you could have theoretically had 10 billion people in the world at the time of the flood.
Where are we at today?
7 billion, right?
Wow.
So it could have been, the theory is, now who knows? I've heard 100,000 also. So I've heard it was as low as 100,000.
Yeah.
But think about this: if they had 10 billion people on the earth, or some number in the middle, when Noah built the ark, he probably had some tools and some technology to build an ark that big.
Yeah, it took him 125 years too, or something like that, didn't it?
I mean, he probably didn't have the M1 chip. He probably didn't have.
No one has that right now.
Yeah, right.
So
it's crazy to think about,
right? Yeah, no, it's 10 billion. I never heard that, like 10 billion people, like where you're talking about, 30% more people than are out there today.
Right.
And like when you start thinking of like how feeding 10 billion people.
Oh my gosh. Right.
And that was before, that was pre-Tower of Babel, so all the same language.
Yeah, and you think about the world was so wicked, God said there's only one option here, and that's to flood the earth. It's just that we're going to have to restart, and we're going to restart with the one righteous guy in his family, and Noah. Which unfortunately, you see the breakdown of sin, because as soon as Noah gets off the ark, what does he do? He gets drunk. He goes and gets hammered. And then his son does something weird that we really don't understand. And then within a couple generations, his kids have stopped telling each other about God. And now they're all a bunch of lost sinners who don't believe in God either. And God has to call a guy named Abraham out because nobody else remembered. And so it's just story after story of God doing something great, and then us forgetting about it. God doing something great, and us forgetting about it. And that, my friend, is why we need Jesus.
Right? No, it's amazing how it's the same story pretty much over and over and over again.
It's like the book of Judges, right?
Yep. Same story, rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat.
Yeah. It's like the saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And you see that rhyme all throughout the Bible, right? Genesis 1 to Revelation 22.
No, absolutely. Well, you gave me a lot to think about, Drew. Thanks for that.
For sure. I know I didn't answer your question, but
I know.
Ribs.
Right. Now you got me thinking about barbecue, and I'm trying to eat better. It's the new year. Thanks for that.
I know. I'm always thinking about barbecue though.
Right. I've accepted barbecue into my heart and my arteries.
Yeah.
So
that's right, man. You got to. It's God given. God's grace.
Right. Unreal. All right. Well, Drew, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, you can follow us at Forefront Church. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram. You can catch us at forefrontchurch.tv. We're located in Southwest Denver. So come hit us up, and we'd love to hang out.
Perfect, Drew. Thank you so much.
All right, Rob. Talk to you soon.